Imagine a narrow stretch of water so important that if it were suddenly blocked, the entire global economy could feel the shock within days. Oil prices could surge overnight, shipping routes could collapse, and energy shortages could spread across multiple continents. This place is not a giant ocean or a massive canal. It's a relatively small waterway called the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important locations on Earth. It sits between Iran on the northern side and Oman and the United Arab Emirates on the southern side. This narrow passage connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and eventually the Arabian Sea. But what makes it so crucial is that it serves as the only sea route for most of the oil exported from the Persian Gulf to reach the rest of the world. At first glance, the strait might not seem particularly impressive. It stretches about 167 kilometers in length, and at its narrowest point, it is only about 33 kilometers wide. However, the space available for ships is even smaller than that. The shipping lanes used by oil tankers are only about 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a small buffer zone to avoid collisions. Now imagine some of the largest ships ever built on Earth passing through these tight corridors every single day. Oil tankers carrying millions of barrels of crude oil carefully navigate this narrow passage while surrounded by strong currents, heavy traffic, in one of the most politically sensitive regions in the world. The importance of this route becomes clear when you look at the sheer amount of energy that flows through it. Every day, roughly 17 to 20 million barrels of oil move through the Strait of Hormuz. That is nearly 1/5 of the total oil consumed globally. In other words, about 20% of the world's oil supply travels through this single waterway. But oil is not the only resource that moves through the strait. A large portion of the world's liquefied natural gas shipments also pass through here. Countries like Qatar export massive quantities of LNG through the Strait of Hormuz to customers across the globe. When you combine oil and natural gas shipments, this narrow passage becomes one of the most critical energy corridors on the planet. Because of this enormous flow of energy resources, experts often describe the Strait of Hormuz as the world's most important oil choke point. A choke point is a narrow route where large volumes of trade must pass through, meaning any disruption there can have massive consequences. The countries that depend on this route include some of the world's largest oil producers: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates all export significant amounts of oil and gas through the strait. For many of these nations, it is the primary gateway connecting their energy resources to international markets. Once the oil leaves the Persian Gulf, it travels across oceans to reach major energy consumers. A large portion of these shipments goes to Asia. Countries like China, India, Japan, and South Korea are among the biggest importers of oil transported through the Strait of Hormuz. For some of these economies, the strait is absolutely vital. Many Asian nations rely on Middle Eastern oil to power their industries, transportation systems, and electricity generation. If shipments were disrupted even for a short time, the impact could ripple through global supply chains and financial markets. The importance of the Strait of Hormuz is not just economic, it is also deeply connected to global politics and security. The region surrounding the strait has been a center of trade and conflict for centuries. Long before oil became the most valuable commodity in the modern world, merchants and explorers passed through these waters carrying spices, textiles, and precious goods between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Today, the stakes are far higher because modern civilization runs on energy. Oil fuels transportation networks, powers industries, and supports the global economy. As a result, any threat to the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz quickly becomes an international concern. This is one of the reasons why the area is heavily monitored by military forces. The United States Navy maintains a strong presence in the Persian Gulf and nearby waters, ensuring that commercial ships can move safely through the region. Several other countries also deploy naval forces to protect shipping routes and maintain stability. On the northern side of the strait lies Iran, which has its own powerful naval forces operating in the area. Over the years, tensions between Iran and Western countries have sometimes led to confrontations near the strait. These tensions occasionally involve the seizure of ships, military exercises, or warnings about possible disruptions to shipping traffic. Iran has, at times, threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to economic sanctions or geopolitical conflicts. While these threats have never resulted in a complete closure, they highlight the strategic leverage that control of this waterway can provide. The mere possibility of disruption is enough to affect global markets. Whenever tensions rise in the region, oil prices often spike because traders fear that supplies might be interrupted. Even small incidents involving tankers or naval vessels can send shockwaves through energy markets. The reason these events matter so much is that there are very few alternative routes available for exporting oil from the Persian Gulf. Some countries have built pipelines that bypass the strait, allowing limited quantities of oil to reach other ports. However, these pipelines cannot handle the enormous volume of energy that currently moves through the Strait of Hormuz. In reality, the majority of Gulf oil exports still depend on this narrow maritime passage. That makes the strait a critical bottleneck in the global energy system. If it were ever blocked or severely restricted, the consequences could be dramatic. Experts believe that a major disruption in the Strait of Hormuz could cause oil prices to skyrocket within days. Since oil prices influence the cost of transportation, manufacturing, and electricity, the impact would quickly spread throughout the global economy. Fuel prices could rise sharply, airlines and shipping companies could face higher operating costs, industries that rely on energy could see production costs increase, and consumers around the world could feel the effects through higher prices for goods and services. Despite these risks, the Strait of Hormuz continues to operate as one of the busiest shipping routes on Earth. Every day, dozens of massive oil tankers and cargo vessels pass through its narrow lanes. Some of these ships are among the largest vessels ever built, carrying millions of barrels of crude oil worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Guiding these enormous ships safely through the strait requires careful coordination. Navigation systems, maritime traffic control, and international shipping regulations all play a role in preventing accidents in this crowded waterway. Weather conditions can also present challenges. Strong winds, currents, and occasional sandstorms can make navigation more difficult for large ships. Yet despite these obstacles, the strait continues to function as a vital artery connecting the energy resources of the Middle East with the economies of the world. The story of the Strait of Hormuz is a reminder that geography can shape global power and influence in unexpected ways. A narrow channel of water only a few dozen kilometers wide has become one of the most important strategic locations on the planet. It shows how interconnected the modern world truly is. Energy produced in the deserts of the Middle East travels through this small maritime corridor before reaching factories in Asia, cars in Europe, and power plants in cities around the world. In many ways, the Strait of Hormuz acts like a valve controlling the flow of energy that powers modern civilization. As long as it remains open and stable, the global energy system continues to function smoothly. But if something were to disrupt that flow, even temporarily, the ripple effects could spread across the entire planet. And that is why this narrow passage of water, often overlooked on world maps, remains one of the most watched and strategically significant places on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz may be small in size, but its influence on the modern world is enormous. It is a gateway for global energy, a focal point of international politics, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful forces shaping our world come from the geography of a single narrow strait.